English translation: accurate, faithful to meaning, YouTube community safe, original structure preserved. If you felt that your own brother might be dangerous, what would you do? 1 week before Rob Reiner passed away, his daughter left in fear after a brief meeting with her brother. She had no evidence, only a gut feeling. But if, at that moment, she had spoken up more forcefully, if the family had set boundaries earlier, would two lives still be here today? How far should a parent's love go? And when does protecting a family mean having to say enough? Share your answer in the comments. On December 14, 2025, Hollywood was shaken by the news that legendary director Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, had died in their own home in Brentwood. Amid waves of grief and disbelief, the Reiner family chose silence. That silence was later broken by Tracy Reiner, Rob's daughter, who spoke out publicly for the first time as someone from inside the family. In a trembling statement, Tracy admitted that she still could not fully believe what had happened. What stunned the public even more was her revelation. Nick Reiner, her younger brother, had confessed the reason that led to the irreversible act. It was not a single impulsive moment, but the result of a long chain of warning signs that had been ignored for years. Just 1 week before the tragedy, Nick Reiner was the one who reached out to Tracy. Not with familiar messages of apology or promises to start over, but with an urgent request to meet, almost a plea for help. He said he was in a situation that could no longer be delayed and needed to see her immediately. They met at the guest house on the family's Brentwood property, a place that had long served as a refuge whenever Nick fell into crisis. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Tracy vividly remembers the moment Nick walked into the room. Gaunt features, unfocused yet tense eyes, and a low, heavy voice, as if suppressing an inner rage. Nick did not beat around the bush. He demanded a large sum of money immediately. Not to get his life back on track, not for treatment or work. Nick stated bluntly that he was drowning in debt, that everything had gone out of control, and that without money right away, everything would completely collapse. The way he spoke did not sound like a request, it sounded like an ultimatum. When Tracy asked what was really going on, Nick became closed off and cold. He said the family no longer trusted him, that his parents were always controlling him, making decisions for him, holding on to money and power for too long. When he spoke about Rob and Michelle, his tone was no longer the familiar resentment, but something far more disturbing, detached, as if they were no longer his parents, but merely obstacles. What truly terrified Tracy was not what Nick said, but how he changed throughout the conversation. The physical distance between them gradually closed. Nick moved closer as he spoke, his eyes fixed on her. There was no explicit act that crossed a line, but Tracy's intuition kept screaming that something was deeply wrong. She felt an invisible pressure, as if being backed into a corner, a primal sense of danger, the kind humans feel when facing a threat they cannot name. Tracy found a way to end the meeting as quickly as possible. She made an excuse, stood up and left without looking back. As she walked away from the guest house, Tracy was still shaking. She knew she had just witnessed something more serious than an ordinary crisis, but she could not label it. There was no evidence, no criminal act, only a chilling instinct that Nick was dangerously close to breaking, and that this time, things could spiral beyond the family's control. 7 days later, that instinct became reality in the most brutal way. According to Tracy, what happened was not unexpected when viewed against Nick's entire past. From the age of 15, Nick had shown impulsive behavior and entered a long cycle of rehabilitation centers across California. Each time he returned, the family hoped that this time would be different. But alongside addiction came gambling problems and mounting debt. Nick repeatedly fell into debt totaling tens of thousands of US dollars, often lying to borrow money from relatives. Every promise of one last time was quickly broken. Psychological pressure weighed on Nick from an early age as well. Growing up in the shadow of his famous father, Rob Reiner, and his legendary grandfather, Carl Reiner, Nick always felt he was never good enough. Even during periods that seemed stable, especially while working on the film Being Charlie, Nick eventually returned to old patterns, each relapse more severe than the last. Tracy emphasized that her parents never abandoned Nick. For decades, Rob and Michelle sought every form of help available: doctors, therapists, and long, expensive treatment programs. They rearranged their lives, careers, and schedules to prioritize their son. After every round of treatment, Nick was always welcomed back to the guest house, despite emotional outbursts, broken promises, and both emotional and financial damage. Rob once confided that what troubled him most was not knowing whether to trust professional advice or to listen to what he believed was his son's true voice. In Tracy's eyes, her parents were not blind. They were simply people who believed their love was strong enough to keep their child from falling even deeper. While Rob and Michelle continued trying to keep Nick close, the rest of the Reiner family gradually reached a different conclusion. Distance was necessary for self-protection. Years of witnessing Nick's relapses, emotional explosions, and the constant crises that drained their parents had worn down the patience of his siblings. Romy Reiner, the daughter who was most often by her parents' side, was the most visibly affected. She had grown accustomed to late-night phone calls, escalating tensions in the house, and the helpless feeling of watching her parents exhaust themselves worrying about their son. Over time, Romy chose to keep her distance from Nick, not out of hatred, but because she could no longer bear to watch her parents suffer while being unable to stop it. English translation: accurate, faithful to meaning, YouTube community safe, original structure preserved. Jake Reiner went even further. He had nearly cut off contact with Nick for many years. For Jake, silence was the only way to maintain stability in his own life. He did not argue, he did not confront, but he also no longer took part in any attempts to save Nick. Over time, that silence became an invisible wall between the two brothers. With Tracy Reiner, however, the relationship took on a different tone, more complex and far heavier. As Rob Reiner's adopted daughter, Tracy had always tried to act as a mediator within the family. She was often the one her parents trusted to handle sensitive matters, especially those involving money and difficult decisions surrounding Nick. That role, unintentionally, became fuel for a quiet, simmering jealousy within Nick. Nick did not just feel abandoned, he felt replaced. In his eyes, Tracy was the one who was trusted, listened to, and empowered, while he, the biological son, was constantly monitored, doubted, and controlled. That comparison was never openly voiced, but it grew in silence, gradually hardening into resentment. According to those close to the family, Nick frequently hinted that Tracy didn't understand this family, that she had no right to decide. These remarks never erupted into direct confrontations, but they revealed a psychological boundary that had already been broken. Nick no longer saw his siblings as family, but as people standing on the opposite side. As those sibling bonds unraveled, Nick became increasingly isolated within his own family. There was no one close enough to pull him out of the spiral, and no one he trusted enough to tell him the things he did not want to hear. In that void, extreme thoughts found more room to grow, quietly, unchecked, until they crossed a point of no return. On the evening of December 13th, 2025, the Reiner family attended the annual Christmas party hosted by Conan O'Brien, a familiar Hollywood gathering where laughter, lights, and light-hearted conversation usually masked the fatigue behind the scenes. But that night, Nick Reiner did not blend in. Those present recall that Nick appeared dazed, unfocused, repeatedly asking strange questions about fame, as if searching for validation from those around him. He interrupted conversations, made comments out of context, and gave off such a strong sense of disconnection that others felt uneasy. Rob Reiner, who had always tried to protect the family's dignity, pulled his son aside to speak with him. The conversation quickly turned tense. There was no shouting, no public outburst, but it was strained enough that those nearby sensed something was very wrong. Rob reprimanded Nick for his behavior and attitude. Nick responded with coldness and suppressed irritation. Minutes later, the family left the party earlier than usual, a rare and deeply unusual decision. No one knows exactly what happened behind the doors of the Brentwood house. The only confirmed detail is that by the afternoon of December 14th, Romy Reiner grew concerned after being unable to reach her parents. When the family's regular massage therapist also received no response, Romy decided to go to the house herself. The silence inside was the first thing that sent a chill through her. No sound, no movement, just an unnatural emptiness. Then Romy found her father. Shortly afterward, Michelle's body was discovered in another part of the house. Everything collapsed in that moment. As the scene was secured, Nick Reiner was nowhere to be found. His absence immediately became a critical question. Security cameras later captured Nick moving erratically during the night, appearing at a gas station near the University of Southern California. He was wearing a hat, a jacket, and a backpack, disoriented, like someone trying to flee without knowing what he was running from. At approximately 9:30 p.m. that same day, police surrounded and arrested Nick. There was no chase, no significant resistance, just a quiet end to a period of chaos that had been building silently for a very long time. That fateful night did not only end 2 lives, it marked the complete collapse of a family once seen as a symbol of love, patience, and the belief that everything would eventually be okay, until it was no longer possible. At present, Nick Reiner faces 2 counts of first-degree murder and is being held without bail. But for Tracy, the deepest pain does not lie in the indictment. It lies in the unfillable void left by her parents. Despite the loss and trauma, Tracy says she remains grateful for the unconditional love Rob and Michelle gave her, regardless of blood. The Reiner siblings hope their parents will be remembered for their extraordinary lives, their kindness, and their unconditional sacrifice, not solely for the tragedy that ended them. The Reiner family tragedy resembles a downward spiral that Nick's parents spent their entire lives trying to resist. But when resentment, pressure, and debt exceeded all control, every effort to save the situation was swept away, leaving behind a quiet, enduring pain for those who remain. What is most haunting is not the moment the tragedy occurred, but the warning signs that appeared long before. The uneasy instincts, the fear that could not be named, the advice dismissed because of a father's belief that my child would never do that. And now the question is no longer just for the Reiner family, it is for all of us. If you were in that situation, what would you do? Would you continue protecting the person you love at all costs, or stop to protect those who remain? Where is the line between love and denial? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every perspective matters, because sometimes a single answer today may help someone out there change course before everything becomes too late.